Hey everybody, welcome back to WineupTV. I'm your host Wayne with Mario Monticelli from Trinchero Winery, the winemaker since when?
2007.
2007. When we come back, we're going to do 3 different shows, 2 wines per, and he's going to tell you all about the vineyards and his philosophy on winemaking. See you in a second. Mario, welcome to beautiful Portland, Oregon.
Awesome to be here.
You ever come up here? I mean,
every year.
Okay, once a year?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. You're right in the middle of Pinot country.
I love it. I love
and you live in, I think, one of the most beautiful places in the world I've ever lived, and that's Napa Valley. Yeah, dude, I mean, there's a piece of my heart that's always in Napa, and it's just a beautiful place to live. And you have a couple kids now to raise a family. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. All right, give me a little Reader's Digest condensed version of your background. You can start even from your father, you know?
Well, yeah, wine has always been a part of my life. You know, my father was born in Italy, and when they came to the United States, like many farmers, they grew grapes, and they grew Thompson seedless grapes for raisin grape or table grape production. But the most important part were the 3 rows of Italian red varieties that were planted on the side of the property, and that's where I learned viticulture. Our father would take us down, and he'd make us work in the vineyard with the irrigation and the pruning and the suckering. My favorite part was lunch after working in the fields. You know, there was a big long table, and our grandmother, you know, made an awesome meal for 20 people, and there was a jug of wine, you know, for every 4 people, you know, down the table.
That is cool.
And if you finished that jug, by golly, we opened another jug.
Yeah, absolutely.
The wine never went dry at the Monticelli house. But even as a kid, you know, drinking wasn't taboo. It was encouraged. We didn't drink out of fancy wine glasses like these. I had a Flintstones jelly jar.
Nice.
You know, and you'd get a finger of wine, and then the rest of your jar would be full of water. And as you get older and older, you get more and more fingers of wine and less water. And I was probably 14 years old when, you know, I would be drinking a glass of wine with meals with the family, and I loved it. You know, I loved everything about wine. I feel very fortunate that I never had any illusions of wanting to be a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman or an astronaut. I mean, I knew I wanted to make wine. So I'm very fortunate, went straight to UC Davis. Graduated in 4 years with 2 majors, one in viticulture and enology and the other one in Italian, which is why I worked that harvest in 1999 at Antinori. That was my first
What a great experience that must have been.
Beautiful. I mean, just one of the most amazing spots. A tiny, tiny village called Montefiore Dolfi. Maybe 400 people lived there. Nobody spoke a word of English, you know, so it was like, you know, total immersion into this really awesome old school Italian culture.
That is awesome. And then you got a job in 2007 at Trinchero.
Yep, that's where, yeah.
And you are now in charge, pretty much without a budget, of their top tier wines.
Yeah,
which I think is awesome.
It's nice. I mean, Trinchero Family Estates. It's a big company. You know, a lot of different varieties and different brands under the Trinchero Family Estates umbrella.
Look at how beautiful.
Picture of my winery.
Yeah, of my wine. I like it. You own it. It's like this picture of my winery.
Yeah.
And he says these are my doors I go into, and what a great thing. For those of you that have never been to Napa, or have been in Napa but always kind of passed by Sutter Home, because that's like the parent company. You know, you got to kind of revisit, especially this day and age where these brands have reinvented themselves, and they are, even Gallo, I remember meeting Gina back in the mid-90s, and they have their high-end Chardonnay and Cabernet as well. And it's just kind of taking the best of the best fruit and just reserving it for your own use.
Exactly.
So this is awesome. Okay, so tell me about these wines we're going to taste today.
Sorry. Well, everything is estate, so that's the most important thing when it comes to, you know, for me growing fruit, is having complete control over the viticulture. So everything that we do for Trinchero Napa Valley is estate, meaning we own the vineyards. So I get to be in charge of irrigation and canopy management and crop thinning, ultimately all the picking decisions.
Which hat do you get to wear at any given day?
Today I'm wearing the marketing hat, you know, and then other days it's the viticulture hat.
Sure.
Some days it's you know, winemaking, but yeah, lots of different hats to wear. So that's the best part, is having control over all the facets of the winemaking. And the most important for me is the viticulture. I always like to use the analogy of making tomato sauce. You can take tomatoes and you can make tomato sauce. You start with great tomatoes, it's easy to make great tomato sauce. You can make tomato sauce out of bad tomatoes, but you gotta manipulate them. You gotta add sugar and oregano and garlic powder and all these things to cover up the flavor of bad tomatoes. So what I do is everything in my power to grow the best fruit possible. And then the winemaking, I don't really manipulate too much, it's...
And then you're pretty blessed, living in Napa, very consistent weather. Then you have, and you came in on probably one of the greatest vintages of the last decade, 07, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
for that.
If you couldn't make great wine in 07, dude,
you should get in the wrong business.
Yeah, right, wrong business. And then flash forward to 4 years later, you have 2011, very challenging.
Yep.
And I know that, the Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley is more, it's easily with mold and mildew. Down in Napa, you got thicker skin cab. You're dealing with grapes that can stand up for a little bit more harsh weather.
Yeah, they got rained on in 2011. It didn't really affect the quality from my perspective. Cabernet, like you said, loose cluster, thicker skins. A little bit of rain isn't gonna turn the cluster to rot. Where with Pinot Noir, tight cluster, thin skin, you get water in the middle of that cluster, and I've seen it just rot from the inside out.
And you don't even see it until
overnight.
You break.
It happens overnight.
Until you break open those clusters. So 2011, I've had several 11s already, and I know we're not going to drink any 11s, or at least red wines today. But what I've noticed is, drinking some older vintages of Napa Valley Cabs in the 70s and early 80s, they picked their grapes at a lower sugar, higher acid, and the wines were, I think, made for longer term aging.
Absolutely.
As opposed to now, where Parker comes out, and you're making wines for Parker, Tans, or whatever, which are more opulent right out the gate. What are your philosophies on that?
Well, just like you said, it's a vintage to vintage variable, so definitely it irks me when people classify a vintage as being a bad vintage.
Sure.
So classic example, 97 versus 98. 97 was the vintage of the century, and the wines flew off the shelves and they were acclaimed really well. And 98's, everybody just crapped on them. Pardon my language. But
sure.
They weren't received very well. They were talked down about, and they didn't sell very well. And I remember just 4 years ago pulling out 97s and 98s, and the 97s were all over the hill. Where the 98s were still tasting really good. Yeah. And like you said, it's a function of acidity. I've always felt that the higher the acid, the more potential that wine has to age. And in a cooler vintage, you're not going to get as much of that acid converted over to sugars. So therefore your alcohols are going to be lower, your acids are going to be higher, and their wine's meant to lay down for a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think that's neat. I try to find wines in my distributor, that are a little older, because being a human being, we want our wines great right now. I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait a year or a month.
I don't know what I'm going to do in 5 years.
I want to get today. All right, let's talk about your Sauv Blanc.
All right, Sauvignon Blanc. Our vineyards are located all over Napa, so we own 7 vineyards in Napa. Mary's Vineyard Sauvignon Blanc, it's up in Calistoga. Mary's Vineyard and Mario's Vineyard, named after the founders of the company, Mary and Mario Trinchero. Mary's Vineyard, warmer climate. Sauvignon Blanc, for me, it's one of the most interesting and versatile varieties out there, in the sense that you can have Sauvignon Blanc that's really green, really grassy, that vegetal cat pea kind of aromatic and everything. You can get citrusy grapefruit characteristics if it's a little bit warmer. You can get orange peel and riper citrus characteristics. You can get stone fruit characteristics. You can get tropical characteristics, just depending on where that fruit is grown.
All in the same grape.
All in the same grape,
yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of either extreme. I don't like green grassy characteristics, and that's why we're lucky the vineyard is up in Calistoga, which is the area, warmest area in Napa. So lots of sun exposure. Pyrazines are the name of the molecules that actually create that green bell pepper aromatic, and they're broken down by UV light. So when you taste a wine, be it Cabernet, Cab Franc, Sauvignon Blanc, whatever it is, and you smell that green bell pepper aromatic, generally chances are it's because they didn't do enough work in the vineyard to expose that fruit to UV light before they picked it, and hence you're going to have those green pyrazine components in the wine. So here, I'm doing a lot of work to make sure that we got good sun exposure. We pick the grapes at optimum ripeness. Everything is fermented in stainless steel. There's no oak, there's no malolactic. It's just meant to be crisp and lean and refreshing.
It's good fruit. It's grapefruity a little bit, but not overly.
Right.
It's got some nice tangerine notes to it. And you're right, it's not that extreme cat pissy smell that some Sauvignon Blancs can have, which some people really enjoy. I mean, the beautiful thing with wine, and I tell these people when I give my wine classes, we're all little snowflakes in this world. What I smell and taste and feel is mine. I own it. It's like you. But as a winemaker, you have to kind of, I know you're making wines to your style. I mean, you have a certain stylistic approach, what you've learned, what you've tasted, what you've seen. But then you have to kind of think about, okay, now I need to make wine for an audience, and how am I going to do this consistently?
Right. No, and that's when you come into vineyard designates. You'll always have that consistency because it's always going to be Mary's Vineyard.
And how many acres is Mary's Vineyard?
8 acres.
Just 8 acres, and you only make Sauvignon Blanc off that one.
Sauvignon Blanc off
and your case production on this can't be more than
3,000 cases.
3,000 cases.
It's the largest production of all the wines that I do.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So what's the retail on this?
I don't know. Depends on where you are. 24?
Yeah,
20,
average.
20,
Average,
bucks? Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
Something like that. Give or take it. Yeah, hey, he's a winemaker,
I don't
right?
buy it.
He is, he's not the marketer. He's marketing his wines today, but he doesn't know all this stuff. All right. Let's talk about the reds. Being a wine drinker for so long, and living in Napa and going to the Rutherford Dust seminars and all this other stuff that I was involved in when I lived in Napa. I am a big fan of Napa Valley wines. I think what's kind of sucked over the last 10 years, have gotten so dang expensive on some of the spectrums.
True.
But when you bring it back, I think Napa's really trying to pump out more affordable wines. You have to get people involved in your label. And how are you going to do that? So this one right here, this is the Mario's Vineyard. And how many acres is Mario's Vineyard?
11 planted.
11, and you have room for more plantings if you need be?
No,
okay.
The property is pretty much, it's 14 acres, the whole property. That's where our winery is located, and it's planted all the way around. So
very cool.
It is what it is. That's the beauty about vineyard designates is you're always going to be getting the same fruit from the same terroir. And if one of the critics happened to give Mario's Vineyard a 100-point score, which would be awesome.
Your wine would sell out overnight. You don't want that to happen.
But I can't all of a sudden start making 10,000 cases of it either.
You'd be wearing a medal around your neck. You'd be on a podium at Napa, right up there next to the grape crusher, going, "Thank you very much." Another 100-point wine coming out of the Napa Valley. This is a neat little map. By the way, these promotional booklets that a lot of wineries put together, I've always think are fascinating. It's a big expanse, but then again, the vineyards go from Calistoga all the way down the almost the Caneros region, down south a little bit. So, and that's the Montone?
Vista Montone.
Vista Montone. Yeah, that's close to Caneros. No, not well. I guess it's
actually a play on words because Carneros in Spanish means ram, and Montone in Italian means ram.
Oh, there we go.
And it's the Vista Montone. It's the view of Carneros. So that's where the name came from.
Very cool. All right, so. This is the 2008 Mario's Vineyard. Tell me about this wine. This is the second wine that you made for Trinchero.
It was a great year. I mean, it wasn't as critically acclaimed as 2007 was, but 2007 was my first vintage working with all of the vineyards. So that learning curve that first year is huge. How you irrigate, how much you irrigate, how you expose the fruit. Is it susceptible to burn? Is it susceptible to other things? So that first year, you kind of step back and you do viticulture 101 and you just kind of make observations. In 2008, I really feel like I was able to grow better grapes because of that 1 year of experience. This vineyard, it's beautiful, bright red soil, comes from a high mineral content in the soil, which I think comes through in the wine. It's very, very dry. It's very well-drained soil, so it needs a lot of irrigation, but the berries are still super tiny, like the size of your pinky finger. So tiny, tiny berries, really loose clusters. The yields are really low. And I think it produces a wine that just has lots and lots of layers of complexity. You start out with kind of some floral aromatics, some rose petal and potpourri, and then you kind of get into the more ripe red fruit kind of aromatics. The tannins for me are super approachable. They're firm, but they're soft. I call them like fuzzy tannins, peach skin tannins. They kind of remind me of the skin of a peach. But lots and lots of layers of complexity. My wife says it's a very feminine wine because it's so complex.
The nose on it, you get that nice dusty characteristics on this.
Yeah, they're all special.
Your philosophy with oak, new, used, new 1 barrel, 2-year, 3-year.
Well, it's different for all the vineyards. So when you're working on vineyard designate wines, we do 5 different vineyard designate Cabernets, and the idea is you really want the terroir from that particular vineyard to shine through. So if I threw 100% new oak at everything, you would have a lot of wines that just had a lot of oaky components, and they would all taste the same. So with Mario's vineyard, having that structure, I'm using about 75% new oak, because it can stand up to that. My Chicken Ranch vineyard, I'm only using about 40% new oak because it's a lighter style wine, and any more new oak would cover up the fruit. So really when I'm working with oak, I feel like it's the second most important thing that I do. The first being growing great fruit, and then the oak is the next component that you can add that can either, take stuff away, but hopefully bring something to the wine. Bring complexity. It's my spice rack, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that to give it the vanilla, to give it some cinnamon, to give it some nutmeg.
And that's all with barrels, and it's fascinating. Different forests, different trees,
coopers, toast levels,
all of it.
The different methods for bending your wood. You can steam bend, you can water bend, different ways of toasting. There's obviously the natural fire toasting, but a lot of coopers are going with convection toasting. I'm buying a new barrel this year where they're actually using lasers to toast the inside of the barrel. So like I'm sure you always got to try new things. I'm not going to ever make my program 1 barrel, 1 toast level. It's always going to be, I'm buying barrels from about 15 different coopers. And that's a lot of different forests, a lot of different toast levels, a lot of different styles of wood, and really, finding out which barrel goes best with a particular wine. I can tell you that for Mario's vineyard, not so much in 2008, but as I've worked with the vineyard a little bit more, I'm using a lot of this barrel called Essentia, which is a Demptos barrel, French oak. The cool thing about this wood is, I don't know if you ever split wood before, but every once in a while you're splitting pine and like it's pink in the middle, and then you wait like maybe 5 minutes and that pink color, it oxidizes and it turns away, it goes away. It's the same thing with oak. Every once in a while they'll split a wood and then it'll be pink in the middle, and they separate all of the pink wood and they make this Essentia barrel out of it. And they've done analysis on this wood to find out that this pink wood has a higher concentration of neresperinoids, which is a flavor compound that creates a floral aromatic. So being a feminine wine and having that floral kind of aromatic to begin with, I complement that with this Essentia barrel.
Interesting. That's how technical wine has become.
Yeah.
It's a simple beverage in theory, but it's such a complex beverage in reality.
Lots of little steps.
Lots of little steps. And this is delicious. What's the retail on this roughly?
About $60.
About $60. I tell you, it's dynamite. Anything blended in with a cab?
No, I make all of my single vineyard designates 100% variety and 100% vineyard designate, just to really showcase terroir. I do make a meritage where I get to blend and be creative and stuff like that. But with my single vineyard designate wines, I really want to showcase that variety in that kind of soil.
All the pressure's off when you do a single vineyard, though. That's right. Because
you're kind of limited.
When you're not blending, it's like, okay, I got this.
But like, I'll pick Mario's vineyard 5 different times over the course of a year. Over the course of harvest. So it's not like we come in and pick everything all in one day. I'll come in and pick the top part of block 1, and that might be 4 tons, and that'll go into one fermenter, and I'll come back a week later and pick the bottom part, and then come back a week later and pick another block.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does not happen very often in the Willamette Valley, because you you pick everything. I mean, once
Yeah.
it's done, it's done. But having the resources, having a full-time harvest crew on standby, you can do that.
I drive them crazy.
I'm sure you do. But it's kind of like picking strawberries. You go through, you pick one, a couple days later, pick some more, and wow, what an interesting thing. All right, so when we come back, we're going to do a couple more shows. So stay with us. But it's fascinating having this gentleman sitting next to me. See you in a second.
Thanks.
All right, man.